Welcome everyone. Cheers. So today I want to talk to you guys about a trend that has existed in the communist movement for many decades, ever since the time of Lenin, really. After all, Lenin wrote extensively on this phenomenon and castigated it whenever he got the chance. And this phenomenon is called impossibilism. But basically, it's reared its head very starkly in Britain ever since the rise of Jeremy Corbyn and Sultana's new party. Now, for those of you who don't know, Jeremy Corbyn is former leader of the Labour Party, Sultana, former member of Parliament for the Labour Party. For many different reasons, they fell out of the Labour Party at different stages in their political career, and they got together to found a very much left wing, further left to the Labour party. Now, Lenin castigated the impossibilists because they had a worldview that all actions done by communists that involved legal actions in mass organizations like trade unions, social democratic parties that don't necessarily have revolution on their agenda and don't have communism as part of their political platform. But the nature of such parties is that they were broad. And though they certainly were not communist or revolutionary, they took workers' consciousness from A to B. Now, impossibilists rejected all these forms of struggle that are legal, trade unionist, broad, in the sense that they can't see the important role reforms contribute to revolutionary consciousness. Now, the issue is that it's quite ironic, really. The impossibilists look at all this work as a dead end, but they don't actually hold up the mirror to themselves and see their own activities as dead ends. They reject work in trade unions. They reject electoral work as simply playing the system's game. So what do they do instead? What practical advice do they give their followers? It's subscribe to my YouTube channel, buy my paper that no one buys, read my blog that no one reads. That is the funnel in which they're guiding people through. It is nothing but endless intellectual masturbation. And it doesn't get you a jolt closer to the lives of ordinary people, the very people you need to win over if you're going to have any hope at enacting political change. Let's get it up here now. There we are. So I zoomed in just to make sure that you can read it all okay. Blah, blah, blah. So I had a little brief gander just so you don't need to. Okay, here we go. The only value he, for Corbyn, has for the likes of the Daily Mail and the Express, who see him as a prominent member of the left and a powerful enemy of Britain and US imperialism. I should say British and US imperialism. He is no such thing. Now, I don't dispute that on its own. Corbyn is not a revolutionary. He's not a communist. He's not threatening the system in a substantial way. However, he poses a threat in that he's uncovering a force that brings us on to the next stepping stone of consciousness and activity of workers. And that in itself is a threat to the ruling class. And that's what we need to see. And that is really the sole reason why we'd ever get involved in these projects. We're not trying to win over the likes of Jeremy Corbyn and Sultana. We're trying to win over some of the hundreds of thousands of people that have signed on to this project. And you're not going to win them over by standing on the sidelines saying, buy my paper to tell you that you're wasting your time and this project that you've engaged in is totally shit. Why? Because I've read Marx and Lenin. The article goes on. When I left for the Workers' Party of Britain, again hoping for positive change, I encountered George Galloway, a man I never particularly liked, as he came across as a political showman, or what would now be called a virtue signaller. Well, this is strange. I don't really know how being a strong political showman, whatever that means, is related to being a virtue signaller. I mean, has Galloway never taken several controversial views that has made him fall out with lots of different people? Isn't that why he's one of the most loved and hated British politicians in this country? Galloway is no opportunist. I don't understand why people have that idea in their heads. Galloway is happy to fall out with people, but only for the right reasons and not unnecessarily. Galloway could have grifted on so many things. He could have collapsed on loads of things. He could have supported the fall of President Assad in Syria. Loads of people supporting Palestine were doing just that. He could have easily avoided dying on that hill. But Galloway knew all too well the very real consequences that the fall of Syria would have on the Middle East. How it would totally disrupt the axes of resistance. How it would completely disarm the Palestinian people that were dependent on using Syria as a route for military aid. So Galloway fundamentally means what he says and says what he means, as he's always said on his talk show. And for being a political showman, well, that's because Galloway has charisma, unlike these idiots who just sit behind a computer writing nothing but foolish and bitter nonsense. But instead of actually taking some constructive advice and looking at Galloway as a role model, a man of charisma, a man who speaks with conviction and is not afraid to show his face on camera, he should be a role model for these people. But instead, they just look at success and charisma, qualities that we really need in our movement now more than ever, as vices. It is nothing but the most despicable manifestation of envy. Despite this, his rhetoric and the supportive words of his inner circle convinced me to join. After joining his party, standing for local election twice, and supporting his campaign to be MP for Batley and Spen, I realised a few things. Galloway, though I never agreed with all of his views, seemed to be a teller of truth against the lies of the state. Yet all he is an obfuscator, worse than a virtue signaller. Just a man who tells whatever part of the truth suits his agenda. Galloway could have had an illustrious political career, with all the trimmings, all the expenses, could have published a book that would have been a bestseller. All he had to do was support the Iraq War. All he had to do was support the fall of Syria. All he had to do was continue to support a two-state solution for Palestine. But Galloway understands that he has a higher calling, as we all do. And he does all that. He makes all these sacrifices so that bitter idiots like this chap who wrote this hit piece can just spew poison on the internet and just poison the minds of whatever communist is unfortunate enough to read this utter garbage. He is a sensitive man with a sensitive ego who, according to his own cronies, does not want to hear negative things about his own great self. I mean, this would be an understandable statement from someone who doesn't know Galloway at all. Well, it wouldn't be understandable because you can't say this crap without actually knowing the man. And I do know the man. And I got to tell you, I've sat on committees with George. I've voiced my disagreements against George Galloway on a number of things. Many times he's convinced me. Other times we had to agree to disagree. But what I can always tell you is that whenever I voice my disagreement with him on any given issue, he he has treated me with nothing but respect and dignity and has engaged all the points that I make. The trick with Galloway is that he can tell between bad faith criticism and good faith criticism. And he knows exactly where your criticism is coming from. And if you're a bad faith actor, he will quite rightly tear you a new one, as he probably did with this bitter ex-Workers' Party member. Someone who frankly should have had nothing to do with us, and someone who should frankly have nothing to do with politics. We need to remind ourselves that those snivelling opportunists like Corbyn and Sultana stand in the way of class consciousness, and ultimately the realization that our only salvation is proletarian revolution. It's constant appeals. It's just boring reading this stuff. It's just constant appeals. This won't work, this won't work. We need revolution. This won't work, this won't work. We need revolution. That's standing in the way of class consciousness. Like anyone who comes across this article will read that and just think, actually, you haven't got a bloody clue what you're talking about. And the truth is, these people don't have a clue what they're talking about. Zara and Jeremy, do they in some way stand in the way of class consciousness? They do and they don't. It's a dialectical phenomenon. On the one hand, they take up wrong positions, and that sets the class backwards. They do the wrong things, and that sets the class backwards. After all, the failure of the Corbyn project, the reasons behind that can be split in two parts. On the one hand, it's where did Jeremy go wrong? And on the other hand is what is inherently wrong in the system of the Labour Party that made the downfall of the Corbyn project in Labour inevitable. Just because the downfall was inevitable doesn't mean it wasn't a worthwhile project to invest in. But now that Jeremy and Zara have founded this new party, that creates a huge opportunity, which is totally lost on these people, to elevate the level of consciousness and activity of people who are excited by this new project and who are determined to take the action necessary to bring change to this country. And so long as that's happening, so long as these people are being brought into some level of activity in where they engage with their neighbours, in where they learn the art of organising, then that is absolutely a step forward from where we are right now. St. Jeremy of Islington has decided to set up a Labour Party Mark II. That should be 2 I's, not an 11. A new addition to the contemptible roster of British imperialist political parties, Corbyn in Parliament is part of a group of 5 independents, the other 4 being elected under a pro-Palestine banner. Now joined by Zara Sultana, who has defected from Labour to help set up this latest endeavour to lead the workers of Britain down the dead end of social democracy again. I mean, the stupidity of this paragraph is mind-blowing. Why do the imperialists need another left-wing party? How can you conclusively say that this new party of Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana is going to become an asset of imperialism? It's not revolutionary, it's not communist, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be used by the imperialist ruling class. You're creating a totally false binary, and again, that is what is fundamentally wrong in your absolutist dogmatic thinking. It's total brain rot. Going back to the failure of the Corbyn project and how I mentioned that the reasons are in 2 parts. On the one hand, there are serious failures of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership and his personality. Frankly, I think he's too weak to be a leader. But then you go into the other problem, and that is the structure of the Labour Party. How the Labour Party, the apparatus of that huge organisational behemoth, was used by our enemies to crush us, was used to undermine the latent radicalism of the Corbyn project. This new party, whilst I don't doubt for a second that all the most rotten elements of the Labour Party are going to latch onto it and try and sabotage it and undermine it. It doesn't have the bureaucratic mechanisms by which our enemies are going to force us out. Not yet, at least. But still, that is a lesson that we need to undergo through practice. We're not going to learn these lessons the easy way. It is going to be the hard way. And again, we need to win workers over by walking them through it, by leading them in that struggle, which is inevitably going to happen inside this party. It is going to become a battleground. It is going to become a terrain of the class struggle. And if we're not at the lead of that, if we're not the hardest workers, the hardest fighters in that, we're not going to influence anybody. And here is another particularly disgusting part of this article, is that they use Stalin to justify their own dogmatic, brain-dead thinking by quoting Stalin, "Social democracy is objectively the moderate wing of fascism." In what context was Stalin using that phrase? Stalin used that phrase in the context of the fact that the Social Democrats were actively paving the way for the Nazis' rise to power in Germany. Even before the rise of the Nazis, the Social Democratic Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Ebert, used Article 48 to suppress workers' uprisings, to suppress the real communist movement that was growing in Germany. And then further down the line, the Social Democrats refused any cooperation with the communists to put down the Nazis. And that's because Germany at the time was solidly under the rule of the capitalist class. And the Social Democrats was totally co-opted. Social Democrats saw the communists as a greater danger than the Nazis because they were under the control of the capitalist class. Now, of course, that quote isn't going to have so much use after World War II, when Stalin's trying to consolidate the rise of people's democracies in Eastern Europe to totally denazify the whole of Europe. And to this end, Stalin advocated cooperation with the communists and the Social Democrats when the capitalist classes of those countries were in a much weaker position. So it is through his practice that Stalin earned his title as a creative Marxist and always upheld tactical fluidity. And that is what communists need to do here in Britain, especially with new projects like the new one that we're seeing with Zara and Jeremy. So we're getting further to the end of the article now. Corbyn, Sultana and their group are Social Democrats, meaning they want to reform the system and hand reforms to the working class. As a communist, I'm not interested in reforming a system that is so transparently rotten as British imperialism. I'm not interested in some petty bourgeois reformer handing my class a few more crumbs and telling us to be grateful. I want to see the working class take its place, its true place, as the ruling class. I dispute that. I don't think you're really that interested in seeing the working class take its true place as the working class. I really do dispute your enthusiasm for revolution. For you have no plan to get to revolution. You cannot see the utility of reforms as stepping stones towards revolution. No, I think you guys are actually more interested in revolutionary posturing, or to borrow a phrase, virtue signaling. I think you're more interested in enhancing your portfolios as so-called revolutionary Marxists without actually thinking pragmatically and practically how you get workers closer to revolution. Because right now, your activities don't mean shit. Frankly, your media outlets are the cul-de-sac here. And I'm producing this video to break anybody who falls into this cul-de-sac that you've built out of it. So there you have it, guys. I hope you found this useful. The main key takeaway points with regards to Jeremy and Sultana's new project is, I know the leadership is corrupt. I know they're going to put the most rotten elements of the Labour Party at the helm of this project. But they're not important. They're not the people we need to be focusing on. The people we need to be focusing on are the hundreds and thousands of enthusiastic people, mainly young people, who want to become organizers in their community, in their trade unions, who are genuinely interested in transforming this country. They are the true agents of change here, and they're the ones that we need to win over. And we do that through practical activity, through constructive criticism. We do that by proving our worth in the struggle, in the fight, and in the day-to-day hard graft that comes through building organizations, through building workers' power. We are in a guerrilla struggle to develop the activity and consciousness of workers, and that's why we need to be here, there, and everywhere. Our mode of work cannot be the same thing every single day. We need to adapt, we need to be flexible, and we need to be creative. And actually, if this thing really does become a success, then splitting the Labour-Tory duopoly is objectively a good thing. For so long, our ruling class has used the Labour-Tory duopoly to stunt any development of political consciousness in this country. Whereas even with the rise of reform and the rise of Corbyn and Sultana's party alike, we are seeing the rise of populist politics in the UK. We are seeing an unprecedented rise of interest in politics by ordinary people. People are starting to feel their own agency in impacting the political scene here in Britain, and we need to take full advantage of that rather than obsessing over the limitations of these forms of revolt. We want to see the breakup of the Labour-Tory duopoly. We want to see 100 flowers bloom in the political scene in this country. We want to see people get excited about politics in this country again. And it's not going to be the final product, but it is an important start.